If you've ever had a BS job, you know how miserable it is. The boredom, the guilt of not being able to do anything all day, the stressful possibility of being found out and getting fired. But one of the worst aspects is just how lonely it can be. If you've ever talked about it with people, you'll hear something like this. Wow, I wish I got paid good money to sit around and do nothing all day. Trust me, no you don't. Being trapped in a BS job is a traumatic experience, and these jobs strongly correlate with mental health problems like depression and anxiety disorders. But it's worth asking, why are these jobs so miserable? We're talking middle-class office jobs getting paid good money to mostly do nothing. Like, what's the problem? David Graeber made an interesting argument in his book, BS Jobs, but I actually think there's something deeper going on here. There's a newly emerging concept of moral injury, which is basically what happens when you're required to violate your own morality. While not normally applied in this context, moral injury seems to impact workers trapped in BS jobs as well. So, do BS jobs inflict moral injury? David Graeber popularized the idea of BS jobs in a viral article and later a book describing these surprisingly common, pointless jobs. These jobs are often highly paid and respected positions, but from the perspective of the worker, the job serves no actual purpose. If you're unfamiliar with this, I encourage you to check out my other video, which offers more of an introduction to the topic. Graeber's theory sparked a radical shift in perspectives on modern work, but it was controversial. Some of the biggest publications in the world had responses within days, trying to combat this new, compelling narrative. The problem was that these counter-arguments fell flat in the face of, well, actual evidence. Graeber's theory is based on asking the people who do these jobs a very simple question. Does the job actually make a difference? And a lot of people said no. One early survey from YouGov found that 37% of workers were certain their job made no meaningful impact on society. Zero, zilch, nada, the job disappears tomorrow and nobody even notices. But you had these free market freaks coming out and condescendingly explaining Economics 101 as if that somehow contradicts survey results. Listen, buddy, the free market doesn't make mistakes, and if you think it does, you just don't understand economics. Actually, those spam emails are important for society, so shut your mouth, stop complaining, and get back in your little cubicle. There have been many studies published on BS jobs now, and it's safe to say that Graeber's theory is fact. The most recent paper was from last year. Swiss researcher Simon Walo found that 20% of American workers have pointless jobs. Another study analyzed BS jobs in higher education, finding that 52% of respondents in non-academic positions considered their job pointless. Even studies that set out to challenge Graeber's theory actually validated aspects of it. Alienation is Not Bullshit confirmed not only the existence of pointless jobs, but the connection between having one and suffering from mental health issues, noting significantly lower scores in workers' well-being. Once you understand that BS jobs not only exist, but are shockingly common, you might see this as a huge cost on society. We've only got so much time and energy, and it's an enormous waste for millions of people to squander away their precious lives playing make-believe all day in an office that produces nothing. But what's worse than the cost on our society is the cost on the worker. It's not just that these workers are wasting away their lives, but they are suffering profound psychological damage. When Graeber published his book, he dedicated not one, but 2 entire chapters on the spiritual damage of BS jobs. But I don't think even Graeber realized how bad things really are. When you're trapped in a bullshit job, you might be suffering from moral injury. It's very important that we understand what moral injury actually means. It's a very new term only coined in the 1970s by Jonathan Shay, who described it as a soul wound inflicted by doing something that violates one's own ethics, ideals, or attachments. I think about it like a situation where you have to violate your own morality, normally because of your job. However, moral injury is a scenario that makes it easier to suffer from mental health problems, not a mental health problem itself. As explained by the American Psychiatric Association, while not a mental disorder itself, moral injury undermines core capacities for well-being, including a sense of ongoing value-laden actions, competence to meet and face challenges. Moral injury is associated with strong feelings of shame and guilt, and with intense self-condemnation and a shattered core sense of self. Most academic literature explores moral injury as it applies to military veterans or healthcare workers during the pandemic. There was one story of a Vietnam veteran whose commanding officers forced him to open fire on what seemed to be hostile combatants reloading their guns. Later, it was discovered that it was just fishermen and their children. That is moral injury. By obeying orders, you're doing something you know to be wrong. More recently, healthcare workers during the pandemic were subjected to moral injury because hospitals and medical facilities were at maximum capacity. This meant they had to juggle the largest patient loads they had ever seen, making it difficult, if not impossible, to provide the care patients needed. This was also amplified by the Great Resignation, which we also explored in the other video. In a nutshell, you're exposed to moral injury when your morality as a human being comes into conflict with the expectations of your job. You might do something that violates your own morality, like with combat veterans, or you might fail to do the impossible, like care for triple your normal patient load, like with healthcare workers. Now, it might not be obvious how this applies to BS jobs until you start looking at some of the recurring themes in the victims of moral injury. This brilliant researcher, whose name I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, published a paper on morally injurious events in military veterans that is worth exploring here. Combat veterans often have these experiences where their values as human beings come into conflict with the expectations of their job. For example, one veteran had an experience where they weren't allowed to use medical supplies on locals, only other soldiers. On paper, this makes sense, but it creates a difficult situation when you have medical supplies and a child in front of you who really needs them. Your own moral compass is turned upside down. Despite being a much less intense situation, workers trapped in pointless jobs face something similar when their income becomes dependent on living a lie. Graeber called it the forced pretense of working a BS job. Basically, you're being compelled to pretend as if the job matters, but secretly knowing it doesn't. Manipulation and deception are universally reviled, especially when someone does it for personal gain. This is what working a bullshit job feels like, although it's happening against your will. It's not that you want to sit around all day doing nothing. In fact, many workers make numerous efforts to contribute to the company somewhere else, but it just never works out. If the job itself is pointless, there's not much you can do to change that. There's also the aspect of failing to help the world. Let's just be honest here. The whole world is on fire. Droughts, wars, political unrest, and a million other things. We've got some serious work to do. But instead, you're spending all day sending spam emails that no one even reads. How the hell can you justify that as the best use of your time when there are homeless people sleeping on the street in front of your house? All you want to do is help people, but you can't, because if you do, then you'll be the person that needs help. How the hell can you live with yourself when you're wasting away your productive energy in a world that needs so much? Is it any wonder that workers trapped in bullshit jobs feel so guilty and ashamed of themselves? Many veterans had recurring thoughts like, what am I doing here? And thinking it makes no sense for us to be here. They began doubting the mission overall. Even a bad reason is better than no reason. But many veterans don't even get that. Similarly, BS jobs have no reason to exist. They just do. No higher purpose, no impact, not even a marginal improvement on something small. In some cases, it might be profitable for the job to exist, like with telemarketers, but only by actively making the world a worse place. It's particularly painful because you did everything they told you to do. Studied hard, graduated college, developed a valuable skill set, and yet, you're forced to waste away your working life doing something no one really cares about for reasons outside your control. There is nothing more senseless than having a BS job. It's not just that you spend your whole life in purgatory, but the stupidest possible version of it. As Graeber put it, hell is a collection of individuals who are spending the bulk of their time working on a task they don't like and are not especially good at. As someone who has been to hell and back, trust me when I say, you do not ever want to go there. It's the most senseless thing you can possibly imagine. There's also this sense of being overwhelmed from the situation and detaching yourself. As the author put it, this mechanism is a form of denial, which occurs when one is vaguely aware that something is so overwhelming that one chooses to switch off to protect oneself. It's not hard to see why this becomes a necessity in a BS job. You need something to take your mind off the never-ending boredom. People will say if you've got a boring job, just pursue your own hobbies on the clock, but it doesn't really work that way. You'll normally need to be just present enough that if someone messages you or walks into the room, it looks like you're doing something important. If you withdraw too much, you'll get fired. So instead of writing that novel you've always dreamt of, you detach yourself by doom scrolling on social media. Graeber actually made the point that most of our culture now is filled with things you can do while pretending to do something else. Looking at memes, reading short social media posts, short-form video, and so on. You can be halfway working and halfway watching TikTok, and for a lot of people, that's exactly what they do. What's interesting about this is that data from social media seems to validate this idea. Listen, I've worked in digital marketing basically my whole life, and every report or study I've ever seen confirms one very specific time window for when it's best to post to social media. That time? During working hours. It's true on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Reddit, TikTok, Medium, email lists, and on and on and on. People are online during their working hours, when they're supposed to be working. I'm sure there are some people with important jobs doing this during downtime or whatever, but let's not forget, there are 33 million Americans with pointless jobs. What else is there to do all day other than tune out listening to podcasts or doom scrolling cat memes? Social media is a convenient distraction from the sad reality of your life in a bullshit job. You detach and tune out to the best of your ability because the human brain isn't made to play make-believe office worker all day. One of the most difficult aspects is the moral ambiguity of the situation. Some veterans constantly switched between saying, "I did wrong," and "I didn't do anything wrong." Do you repent for a sin you committed against your own will? How can you live with yourself when you can't even decide if you're morally culpable or not? Is the Nuremberg defense a valid reason for doing terrible things? As a worker in a BS job, you are both perpetrator and victim. You're a perpetrator in the sense that you functionally become a con artist. Your survival depends on your ability to keep the ruse going. So guess what? You do. But you're a victim in the sense that you're helpless in preventing such an outcome. As one veteran put it, you're responsible for what you're doing, but not blameworthy. Just like the military veterans, workers trapped in bullshit jobs are compelled to violate their own morality in order to keep their livelihood. The difference is in degree, not kind. To return to the APA's definition, moral injury is associated with strong feelings of shame and guilt and with intense self-condemnation and a shattered core sense of self. This is the perfect encapsulation of what it's like to have a bullshit job. And if you read the experiences Graeber included in his book, it's difficult not to see the similar symptoms. But for all the similarities between veterans and workers with bullshit jobs, there is one crucial difference: the opportunity for the moral injury to end. If you finish your tour of duty, you can refuse re-enlistment and go back to normal life where everything makes sense. It'll stay with you, but at least it's over. If you're a worker trapped in a bullshit job, there is no end. It goes on forever and ever and ever and ever until you get fired or die. I cannot stress this enough. These are steady, stable office jobs with a good salary and healthcare. How can you leave that behind to take a risk on another job, especially if people depend on you? Sorry, little Billy, but we won't be able to afford your Christmas presents this year because I decided to leave my office job to drive an ambulance, even though it cuts my paycheck in half. Worst of all, when you're trapped in one of these bullshit jobs, you don't have anyone to be angry at. You're filled with this objectless rage. You can't get mad at your boss because they're normally in the same boat. You can't get mad at the owner because they probably don't even know. You can't even get mad at this vague idea of the system because it's so abstract that it doesn't matter how you feel about it. The system doesn't care. You're filled with anger and frustration, and all you can do is turn around and project this venom onto yourself, blaming the man in the mirror for living a lie, feeling guilty for your middle-class lifestyle built on a career of masks and mirrors. The fear, the anxiety, the stress of carrying this burden on your shoulders alone, indefinitely, and no one even lends a sympathetic ear. No one cares. Tell your first world problems to your therapist, motherfucker, because there are people who do real jobs and have real suffering. If your pain is not immediately visible to the eye, then it simply does not exist. So you should shut your mouth and get back to your cubicle. Had someone been condemned to pushing a boulder up a hill for all eternity, that might be worthy of compassion. But definitely not you in that air-conditioned office as part of the laptop class. Your life's work might be just as pointless, but there is one crucial difference. Sisyphus does it for all eternity. You don't. You will die one day. Your time here is limited, and it will be gone soon, like sand falling through your fingers into a landfill. Isn't it traumatic to know that and not be able to change it?